I am an ex-Muslim, a former Muslim. I myself became very religious and practiced Islam very much, and also tried to tell everyone else about how great it is to be so religious and such an Islamist. The biblical texts are thought to be inspired by God to these people, which is why they wrote them. So God intended things to be written that way. But with the Quran, you go many steps further, and you say these texts are not written by people. They are directly spoken by Allah Himself, word for word,
Right.
and then just revealed to Muhammad and put down by scribes. So you would expect accuracy, but how the hell can you today, in today's time, believe that the sun actually goes under the earth someplace? You have to sit down and diligently reinterpret everything that this book says, and strictly arguing that your reinterpretation is actually true, and that all those who read the book as it is are basically deceptive liars, and that
Welcome to Gnostic Informant, and today I'm joined by Apostate Prophet. Probably, I'm thinking you're probably the biggest guest I've had on yet as far as subscriber count. So that's pretty cool to have you on, and thanks for coming. And I wanted you to join me today because I want to talk about Islam. And we're going to get into some areas about Islam, some my own theories as well as yours, and some discrepancies that are in the text that just don't make sense. Before we do that, tell my audience, they probably already know who you are, but just in case someone who doesn't, give us a little rundown of your background.
Well, thank you so much, first off, for having me here. I really appreciate it, and I hope there will be a lot of great guests that have bigger YouTube channels than mine. But yeah, my name is Ridwan Aydemir. I am very much known as the Apostate Prophet by now, and I am personally a student, currently pursuing a psychology degree. I am very much interested in religion and psychology of religion, philosophy of religion, matters regarding theology and different theological beliefs. I am an ex-Muslim, a former Muslim who grew up in a very religious Muslim family in Germany, where I was born. I was born into a Turkish family in Germany. My parents were extremely religious. I grew up with their religious beliefs. At some point, I myself became very religious and practiced Islam very much, and also tried to tell everyone else about how great it is to be so religious and such an Islamist, and wanted to make everyone else love it too. I spent a lot of time during those years practicing my Islamic beliefs very strictly, and also diligently studying the texts that I'm supposed to believe in. And I read the Quran several times as a believer, as a doubter, and then again when I left Islam. And many things in the Quran actually kind of fueled my my journey of leaving Islam. I felt like so many things that I read in the Quran, specifically discrepancies between the Quranic narrative and different religions, or the Quranic narrative and the natural world around us, put so many seeds of doubts in my head that I tried to suppress by telling myself that I'm just a stupid human, but it just didn't work. And I tried to look for answers. I couldn't find the answers, or the best answers were not satisfying enough. Eventually, it took a long time, but I left Islam and decided to be outspoken. Not immediately. It took some time to question my decisions, to then think about God, to eventually conclude that I don't believe in God, and then to eventually turn my resentment, to be very honest, about my Islamic upbringing into a desire to talk publicly about Islam and everything that is wrong with it. And that's how I started out, and today I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Like, and I noticed the way you, like, what we're talking about isn't, we don't hate, like, it's not, we don't hate Muslims or people who, grow up in that area, but the problems that we're talking about are systemic, that sort of affect the way the world is. I mean, let's be real. Like there's parts of the world where they use the Quran as a way to dictate policy, and let's just be honest, it's not working too good. It just
Mhm.
isn't. So I think a good way to sort of, I don't want to say maybe, yeah, okay, let's just say combat that, is to point out what discrepancies within the text,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of them. I read the entire Quran. One, I can honestly say that,
you
and
did. That's like,
that's my journey is a little different. I was a Christian, and then I sort of, as I devolved from Christianity, I went into Gnosticism hardcore, and I went so hardcore about it that I thought that predetermination 100% was a thing, that we don't even have choice. It's an illusion. So I came across this concept. Actually, I was reading a book called The Alchemist,
uh-huh.
and in the book The Alchemist, they talk about this maktub concept, which is a concept in the Quran. This has actually led me to read the Quran. And this concept, this maktub, is a Arabic word that sort of means destiny.
Mhm.
And basically what it means is that Allah does chooses our fate. The world is under His thumb, and everything that happens is because of His will. So it makes you think like, so then, so then in my mind, I'm like, okay, so the Big Bang happened. So everything after the Big Bang was just a result of cause and effect and cause and effect and cause and effect. And here we are. So I
Mhm.
sort of ran with that for a little while. It didn't take long before I just realized, all right, this is too problematic, because that would mean that all the suffering in the world is because of the same deity, and that his omnipotence of knowing what's going to happen, knowing the future, and being able to do whatever he wants. That means he created us just so that we can fall and be damned and go to hell. That means that would make him a monster. So
Mhm.
then I just became, I mean, by definition, I'm an atheist. Just by definition, is I don't believe in. There's no Yahweh. There's no Jupiter. There's no Zeus. There's no Allah. But I also an agnostic in the sense that I do think that it's possible that there could be something else. I don't claim to know that, and I don't get dogmatic about it either. So I like to look at different spiritual paths and try to pick them apart and study them, and that's why I started this channel. So
It's very funny though. If your entire theory about that same deity that created everything is true, if we assume that it is true, and if I may appeal to my uh, past Islamic beliefs for a second, then the Islamic beliefs entirely agree with the idea that it must be true, that that Allah created everything from the very beginning, and basically destined everything to happen in a specific way. Then that not only implies that that same deity was aware of what would happen, and that he caused everything, that he allowed everything to happen despite knowing that horrible stuff will happen. It directly means that he precisely designed everything to happen exactly as it happens.
right,
So everything that is bad, everything that is evil is exactly his creation. It's not something that he knew would happen and then did not prevent. No, it is something that he himself deliberately designed.
right, which is which is crazy to think about. I mean, there's even, and if you think about, for example, one of the big things that, if you can, when we get into why predetermination is a joke, is when you look at the Earth, right? The young Earth theory versus the Big Bang and the old Earth, whatever the real scientific way, and you look at like plate tectonics.
Mhm.
If you go backwards in time, like the way the plates are moving, we can measure them every year. That's like whatever, so many inches they move. Mountains are rising because of it. Volcanoes erupt because of it. We know that if you take that rate and go backwards with it, you get Pangea, which is a puzzle. These continents fit perfectly like a puzzle. So
Mhm.
that would mean that God created a world just to confuse scientists, because they're looking back at plate tectonics and seeing that this Pangea thing is real, just to confuse them, just throw them. And then you got fossils. The farther down you go underneath the ground, the older they get. So another thing, he's just going to confuse everybody, just throw them off, just to make them think that it doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah,
that's, the more you learn, the more ridiculous it all gets.
absolutely, absolutely.
But let's get into the Quran.
Okay.
So one of the one of the biggest ones that stands out to me is, I'm a big Alexander the Great geek,
Uh-huh.
and I love the Alexander romance. So as I'm reading through the Quran, I get to the chapter called Al Kaf, which means the cave. And it starts off Actually, let's start off with the sleepers thing. Actually, we'll get into Alexander the Great, but let's go in order because that's the order of the actual text.
Mhm.
The cave story starts off about a story about sleepers in a cave who go to sleep for 300 years. It says something like that.
Yeah,
Actually, the Quran is really weird how it presents it. It says, if you do you want to say anything?
I think it says 300 added 9 or something like that.
Yeah, very strange how it does that. Then it says how many people it was. They go, well, it could have been 3, maybe 4, maybe 7. Wink,
I think
wink.
it says, yeah, 3, 5, or 7, and Allah knows best, or it says Allah knows best about the number of years, and some people also know. Yeah,
But isn't Allah the one revealing this knowledge?
yeah. Why doesn't He just tell us the
Allah,
knowledge?
is there another Allah? Is there 2 Allahs?
It is so weird. Why is the Quran, which is the verbatim word of Allah, why is it telling us this story and then speculating about the numbers instead of just telling us the numbers?
Right. And that's another thing that doesn't make any sense. But for some people who are wondering what we're even talking about, there is a story that was written or told, or I'm not sure if it was written down or told. Maybe it doesn't matter. Jacob of Surgu, a Syrian bishop. Saru, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. And that's why I have you here. But he told a story about 7 Christians living under the time of a pagan king in Ephesus, which is in Turkey. Mm-hmm. This is around 250 AD. So they go to a cave and they fall asleep and they pray to God and say, God, help us from these pagan wicked kings. And then 300 years later, they sleep for 300 years and they wake up and they're under the time of King Theodosius, who, if you're a history buff like me, you know that King Theodosius was a insanely fundamentalist Christian, where he literally outlawed paganism and burned down libraries and did all types of crazy stuff in the name of Christianity. Why am I telling you this story? Well, this is the story that's told in the Quran. So it's almost the same exact story. I mean, now you'll hear people say, well, it could have been a different story. Well, that's funny because we also know from scholars that there is over 200 manuscripts in 8 different languages, from Arabic to Greek to all types of basically all the languages from the Middle Ages have a different version of the story that are pretty much the same. So this proves this is a widespread story that everyone knew. So even if this was a revelation, why is God telling a story that everyone already knows and saying this is a Muslim story?
Yeah, well, there are some speculations about this. I mean, let's come to the discrepancies first. It's sure. You said there are certain sources before the Quran or in different languages about this story. So there are certain origins of this entire story, written origins, which come from, I don't know, I'm trying to remember the years. I wrote that down, but from, I don't know, the 5th century or so, or the 4th century, where this story first originates. And then we have certain other sources in which this story is retold. And one thing that they are not sure about, so when the Christian side tells the story, one thing that Christians at that time are not entirely sure about is whether this did indeed happen or whether it didn't happen. Another thing that they are not sure about is in whose time exactly did that happen. They say it started with the time of the Decian persecution. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Where Christians were largely persecuted, and then it then went on for 250 years. But the numbers don't really add up.
Yeah, that always happens when it comes to these type of.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about this, but the Christian sources actually tell us, they tell us about this whole issue as kind of a folk story or as a fact, and they mention several details like that the emperor required that people make sacrifices, but the Jews were exempt from this obligation, but the Christians were not exempt because the Christians were not recognized as an actual religious group. They were just seen as this little group of troublemakers.
Right.
So they were persecuted together with their with their religious authority and the people themselves. And these 7 people, according to those sources, these 7 people then flee and go to a cave and hide there. And then they fall asleep and sleep for 250 years. And when they wake up, they suddenly find themselves in a completely changed land, which has now become Christian. And of course, the emperor Theodosius at that time is totally involved in, bringing these people to light and making some great praises about that. It sounds like a bunch of propaganda.
Right.
But now we have the Muslim account. The Muslim account is found in the Quran. And there are some theories surrounding it that what probably happened, as we encountered in many different narrations about Muhammad, what probably happened is that Christians came to Muhammad and asked him about this stuff, or people who heard of these stories in the Eastern Roman Empire probably brought this information to him, or Muhammad as a merchant himself in his previous life, until he became a prophet, heard about these stories on his travel path throughout the Middle East. But he just seemed to get it entirely wrong. When you look at the Quranic account, you see that there are these religious believers in God. They are 3 or 5 or 7, nobody knows. And they went and they were persecuted because these people in their surrounding had adopted false gods whom they took as partners besides Allah. And they then asked Allah for help. They were persecuted and chased into this cave, and then they fell asleep. And they also had a dog with them, by the way, and for some reason. And they then woke up.
Did the dog live for 300 years too?
Yeah, the dog slept for that long, I think, as well. And they woke up 300 years added 9 later, according to the Quranic account. Their names are unknown. Everything about them is unknown. And then that's basically how the story goes. There are a lot of strange things about this story. And I mean, in the Christian account, you know why they are persecuted, you know who persecutes them, you know how long they have actually slept, you know how many people they were, you even have names attributed to these people. And in the Islamic account, you don't have anything. It's just some vague, strange information that is there in this Quran chapter for no specific purpose, as it seems.
And it's very strange because how long were Muslims even being persecuted in the beginning of Islam? Was that even a thing?
Very briefly, relatively, yeah.
Right. Okay. So maybe they're just trying to squeeze it in that little time period. Yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to look at all angles here. So yes.
One of the things, funnily enough, is Islam adopts this story from the Christian accounts. If we trust the Islamic side, and if Islam depicts these figures as truthful figures who then, wake up in a land where people believe in the one true God, then we have to accept that these people were indeed true believers in the one true God, in the Islamic God, that they were persecuted in their own time, and that they woke up into a time where the belief in the one true proper God was established in their land. But we get this from the Christian sources, this story. And if you, put the things together, the puzzle pieces together, then we have 7 people who actually believe in Jesus as the Son of God and as God, who most likely believe in the Trinity, who then are persecuted by the Romans and go to sleep and wake up in a heavily Trinitarian Christian land where people are, according to the Islamic perspective, heavily involved in in idolatry and worshiping Jesus, which is heavily condemned in the Quran itself, and also described as a reason to go to hell forever and burn there forever. So
right.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. And I was just thinking about what you just said. If it's 300 years have passed by, and the Quran was written in the 7th century, so it had to be 300 years before that. So that means that, like you said, there was no Islam 300 years before the 7th century. So what were they? Were they Zoroastrians? Were they, like you said, were they Christians?
It would have to refer to Christians, but it would have to refer to Christians as truthful Christians, because Muslims have this perspective that the Christians that are around today are basically heretics and disbelievers because they believe in Jesus as their God. But there were originally at the beginning Christians who believed in the one true God and who rejected the notion that Jesus is God or Jesus is the Son of God and all that, which is very foggy. But if you want to connect this scriptural telling of these people with reality, then you have to accept that it was referring to people who did believe in Jesus as the Son of God and who did believe
Right.
in Jesus as God himself.
At the very least, he's the Son of God. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that's okay. So Bart Ehrman wrote a book about this.
Mhm.
In the first century, there was Christians that varied from Ebionites on the one side, and then the Pauline Marcionites on the other side. The Pauline ones are the ones that are like, screw the law, we do whatever we want as long as we believe in Jesus, we're saved. And then the Ebionites were like devout Jews who just believed in Jesus as the Messiah.
Mhm.
There is no such Muslim type Christians that existed. It
Yeah,
didn't happen. You either were you believe at the very least that you believed was Jesus was the Son of God.
yeah,
That has to be part of it, or you were just a heretic.
yeah,
So then maybe they're talking about heretics.
yeah.
That's your only option.
And there wouldn't be a different empire or a different land where, you know, this purely Islamic form of Christianity was established as the religion of the countries. You know, where you have Christianity emerging as the religion of the state or of the people, you have beliefs that are heretical or, you know, disbelief according to the Islamic perspective. So it doesn't make sense. It's
Yeah, there's too many problems with it,
yeah, yeah.
which is what we're about to see in the same book of the Quran. There's a chapter or book. How do you
Chapter. Yeah.
In the same chapter, the cave, we get another story that's very similar, and it almost makes me think this writer had access to like Roman stories
Mhm.
from the Roman Empire. And here's why. So you get a couple pages later, you get to a story about this character named Dhu'l Qarnayn,
Mhm.
which means the two-horned one. And right away, my spidey senses started tingling because I know the Alexander Greek romance, and I know all about Alexander, and I know that in not even just the Greek Alexander romance, but in other legends as well as the Shahnameh, which is the Book of the Kings in Persian, and Arrian's account. All these accounts talk about Alexander, and they you know what? Let me show up my screen. I'm going to show his routes that he took.
Mhm.
Arrian is writing this, and he's got a geographer with them, and they're drawing a map. And as you can see, this giant mountain range. This is where Alexander the Great is said to have passed through. And you notice how you see the two ridges?
Mhm.
They say that he passed through those two ridges. Okay, so he's going through two mountain ranges, basically on his way towards India and towards Afghanistan. This is after he leaves Babylon. Basically, his route. Everyone knows Alexander's route. I'm not just making this up. I'm not just theorizing here. This is deep scholarship. We know where he was. He left traces. They wrote stuff. They described stuff on walls, and there's all types of evidence of where Alexander was on his way to India. And the story is that Alexander the Great erected a border between where Gog and Magog is. They are mythological places, but here's where they are according to the Bible. This is according to the Catholic Bible of where the locations of Gog and Magog is. As you can see, Gog's over here, Magog's over here. But a lot of times you'll see in other maps that Gog is Europe. It doesn't really matter where it is. It's beside the point. The point is where this arrow is, where Persia is, and these arrows over here is where Alexander the Great went through, where he erected his border to keep out these barbarians, they call them. And I guess there are people who just weren't civilized. But the main reason why I showed that is because there's a coin, and as you can see, there's clearly horns on his head. So everybody now, this coin was the most used coin in the ancient world. This coin was everywhere. These coins were being used from Europe down to Egypt, all the way to India. This coin was in circulation. This was like the petrodollar back then. If you need to trade, you need to use these coins. This is how the Greek Empire got its stronghold on the east. You know, circulating money and making trade routes, which is why this is what the whole purpose was. So people in an Arabic tongue referred to Alexander as Al-Sikander. It's actually Persian, actually. Al-Sikander means defender of the people. So they didn't know his real name. They just had a title for him. But if you look at the coins would show you he's the horned one. So there's really no escaping. I mean, there's no other person in history who built a wall in this location who's depicted as having horns and is known as defender of the people. This is the last thing I want to share. Place of the rising sun, which would be the mountains. If you're in that time zone, you would see the mountains rising up from like this. Here's now the sun. We know the sun doesn't actually rise. The sun is, we're revolving on the sun, but the earth is tilted in a way that the poles are like diagonal. So the sun appears, it appears to rise like this. So this is what they would see. They would see across the mountains, they see the sun. So the place of the rising sun would have to be the mountains. So it says, place of the rising sun, two mountains, Gog and Magog, erects a barrier, and obviously the Quran talks about the one true God, right? Well, here's what the Alexander Romance says. Two mountains, God of gods, sole God, he prays God, northern boundaries, Goth and Magog, which is Gog and Magog. Now tell me, is this not the same story or what? Like, I want to, like, seriously, how can this not be the same story?
I mean, there's a lot of debate to this and a lot of research about this. There's a lot of disagreement that's emerged over the millennium, over the last centuries. There's some revisionism done. There is actually a theory that may be considered relatively new, that Dhu'l Qarnayn in the Quran, the two-horned one, may not be Alexander the Great. It may be Cyrus the Great, but it's quite implausible to actually think about that. Okay, Cyrus the Great is depicted or talked of as also somebody who has, two horns on his thing.
I've seen that picture before. I've seen that picture before.
But it doesn't make sense because there's nothing else that relates that is related to Cyrus the Great in the narrative of the Quran. Whereas there is a lot of connection between the Quranic account of Dhu'l Qarnayn and the legendary tellings about what Alexander the Great did. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, I want to throw this out there for people who want to accept Cyrus as the horned one. If you're going to accept that he's the horned one, then you also have to accept that he died by the hands of the Magog people, the Mazagati. The queen of the Mazagati, Queen Tomyris, cut off his head, King Cyrus's head, and threw it into a wine skin, filled it with his blood, and she said, "Now you'll never have to thirst for blood again." So if that's his death, then you're saying that Allah, what did Allah do to make him, like, what kind of power, what kind of wall did he build? It didn't work. That's how he died. That's what Herodotus tells us.
There is a parallel regarding Cyrus the Great and Alexander in terms of how both of these people slowly came into, or Alexander slowly was adopted into the Jewish culture as a righteous or heroic guy, whereas Cyrus the Great was already in, prior to that, known as a righteous man. Very relevant to the Bible and all that. But with Alexander the Great, it's you have these. Cyrus the Great was to the Jews just known as this guy who is like all about vanity, this big guy who has a thirst for power. But later, over time in Jewish culture, they start adopting him and turning him into a figure who is actually called a righteous Gentile in certain sources. For certain reasons, I can't exactly recall why they import him as a. Oh yeah, I think the explanation there is that he was so successful, it is not conceivable that God would let some completely wicked man enjoy these great pleasures of becoming a ruler of the world. And of course, they then associate a lot of stories, a lot of legends with Alexander the Great, and so do many other cultures. He comes into the Christian culture through the Hellenic traditions and through the Jewish traditions as a culture that people look up to, as a legendary ruler that everybody aspires to. And different cultures around the world have different accounts about Alexander the Great. We only have very recently found actual accounts of what Alexander the Great actually did, how he lived and all that. But for very many years, immediately after his death, you probably are familiar with this, stories emerged about how great he was. And these stories were they greatly varied from story to story, from century to century. Right. They added more and more things to this wonderful character known as Alexander the Great. Right. And one issue is that in many cultures, in many languages, he is described as either as Alexander or as the two-horned one, or the one with two horns. And we even have in certain accounts, in certain texts, mentions of him directly with his name, Alexander, the two-horned one, or Alexander was given the name the two-horned one. That's what they explicitly say.
Explicitly,
So
right.
yeah, so he was given the name the two-horned one, and he asked, and he said, "My name is this and this. Why do you call me the two-horned one?" And so these connections are explained in many sources, and these predate Islam. These predate the Quran, and in the Quran's time, when the Quran was emerging, it would already have been known throughout cultures in Europe, in the Near East, in North Africa, that this character Alexander the Great was a huge, brilliant character who is also called the two-horned ones. What's unfortunate is that people didn't actually know, how he was and the things that he actually did. They just had a lot of legends about him, and they just wanted to make him look like this fantastic, great guy, no matter how.
Yeah.
Because it feels great.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Then you add to the fact that this coin was everywhere, so people would see him every day, whether they like it or not, just by seeing a coin going to the market. The horned one, he's the one that saved us from the barbarians of the north. It just matches perfectly. Now, if it is Cyrus, though, what is the difference? Like, Cyrus wasn't a Muslim; he was a Mithra worshiper, or Zoroastrian. It's hard to tell which one. Those two kind of mesh together, but it's very polytheistic in a way that you have different deities. You have Angramanu. You have there's all these different deities. I guess you could call them angels or whatever you want, lower deities than the Ahura Mazda. But then there's Mithra, the mediator. This is not Islam. So whether you put him as Alexander or Cyrus, now you have to face the fact that this prophet of Allah was worshiping other gods. Now the whole thing becomes problematic.
Well, Muslim scholars who want to say that this is actually in reference to Cyrus, they kind of distort Zoroastrianism or Mithra, or different Iranian beliefs, because they even try to make it look like very frequently that Zoroastrianism is actually a monotheistic religion, but it's not. It is only what they mean by monotheistic is that you are supposed to worship one superior god, but that one superior god is not the only god that exists. They have a large collection of gods, and one evil god who is at the opposite of Ahura Mazda. But among those, there is not just one god, but you are supposed to worship that one god.
Right.
So that's what their beliefs are. This is very well known, and it has been preserved. So saying that it was him, and saying that it was him because of monotheism wouldn't really make sense, because it wasn't monotheism. It would be idolatry. It would be polytheism. It would be
fire worship. People were worshiping, praying to the fire. I mean, this all ties into the whole Kaaba thing, the problems with the Kaaba thing, which we're going to get into in a second. But the Zoroastrian Mithraic religions come from the Vedic line, which is from India and Tibet, where Mithra was like Mithra Varuna. And so if you're going to say that this was a true religion before Islam, then you would have to go back even farther and go to Hinduism as being the true religion in the beginning. So it all just falls apart. And Alexander was just one of the prime definitions of a pagan king. Like his text about him was he was one day worshiping Dionysus, the next day worshiping Ammon in Egypt, and then he was over here worshiping Mithra. There's no way you could say he was a worshiper of Allah. I don't even think anyone tries to make that claim.
He had a syncretic religious worldview that was based on very much what is pragmatic for his goals. It wouldn't make sense to
use the term providence above. So I think if you're going to try to make that into a pre-Islamic, it's like, okay, fine, but now you're basically in Gnosticism. Now we're just we're just painting brushes over everything. That's Islamic. Oh yeah, so is that. Like, there's too much problems with that.
As far as I remember, when you go back with the history of Zoroastrianism, as the story goes, I think this is the accepted narrative about Zoroastrianism. It is believed or thought that the character Zoroaster constructs this religion out of his local religion that is already in existence, but he basically turns this polytheistic religion into the religion where you only worship the righteous God who is above everything and who is the light. So this, I mean, this is a religion that comes into existence, into a form of dualism with other gods in an environment where people are polytheistic. So there is no monotheistic origin to that.
No, you're
it
right.
would be- it would be
You
bad.
can't escape that.
Uh-huh.
And-
And so the issue with Alexander the Great, with the Quran, as you said, the Quran explains that this character is called Dhu'l Qarnayn. People apparently ask about him. They ask Muhammad, according to the narrative, and the Quran then says, then it tries to inform Allah, supposedly tries to inform Muhammad about Dhu'l Qarnayn, the two-horned one, and coincidentally, it says things that are just so much in line with the legendary stories about Alexander the Great, such as that he was a great ruler, and Allah gave him so much, and he was a righteous man, and he
2 mountains. That's pretty specific.
yeah. He went to the furthest west and to the furthest east. In the west, he also saw the sun setting in a muddy spring. By the way,
Right.
and then he went to a people whose language he does not understand.
Thank you. That's the big one. I forgot to mention that one.
Which is something that has been attributed to, or connected with Gog and Magog prior to Islam so much, or with stories related to Gog and Magog or people around Gog and Magog so much. And then it says that they were complaining. They were between two mountains, and they're complaining that Gog and Magog are causing trouble and this and that. So Dhu'l Qarnayn then says, okay, I will build you a wall, I'll just do this now. So he asks them for iron, and then he builds this huge wall to prevent those people from coming through. And the Quran then continues and says that this wall will be in existence for as long as Allah wants it, but one day will come when it will be torn down, and then they will basically pour through and invade all the hills of the world.
Now, this is interesting because there's actually a way to look at this as if it already happened. So this was written, we all know the Quran was written in the 7th century. A couple centuries before that, 2 centuries before that, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, with the help of Arabs, by the way, the Moors, this was actually part of the people who got together with the Goths to invade Rome. And this is tested by all scholars that the Moors were involved heavily with helping the Goths out. They invited them into Spain and into northern Africa. That's how Alaric was the one who actually invaded Rome. He made the alliance with them at the Moors, and that's how this has all happened. So he goes. So this writer would know this story. This would be Arabic speakers know about the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths invading Rome and taking over Rome, and even the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So I'm wondering, now I can't prove this, but I'm almost wondering if the writer is allegorizing these events, as in this wall was up, then it fell down, and then Allah caused the Eastern or the Western Roman, those wicked Christians to fall because they weren't Muslims.
The problem is, so the Quran tells this whole story. It makes reference to the future, how Allah will bring it down, and then Gog and Magog will invade the world. And to just quickly point out the parallel here, according to the legendary stories about Alexander the Great. Now, there is some dispute about when these stories came into existence and to what time the oldest manuscript refers to, but we have old manuscripts long before the time of Islam where parts of this story are scattered and found, that Alexander the Great, went there between two mountains and built a wall, and that these people were Gog and Magog and this and that. So we already, and that he was known as the two-horned one. We don't have I think scholars are not exactly sure if the story exactly as it is in the Quran exists before the time of the Quran, but there is enough evidence that there are manuscripts that contain several of these details that are mentioned in the Quran in a scattered way. So if you put them together, you have the story that is basically in the Quran as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it did get updated and changed, and there are later manuscripts that come after the Quran. And maybe because the version I have, he says he prayed to the sole God. It almost makes me wonder if they're that's sort of a later addition in translation. So that's interesting.
Yeah, what I know is that Alexander the Great was a great tool for people, and he was utilized by people, by political powers for their own purposes, to kind of say, hey, look, Alexander the Great, whom everyone admires, he did things that we would do, or he was on our side, and then they refer to invaders as Gog and Magog. For example, I think during the time of the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, they refer to certain hordes from the steppes, from
Turks.
beyond the Caucasians. Yeah, the Turks, or an Iranian people. Several Iranian people.
Scythians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
referred to them as descendants of Gog and Magog,
Right.
or they associated them with Gog and Magog. And Gog and Magog was basically used as this tool to vilify
People who eat
foreign
their babies.
tribalist people who will come for you and who will have no mercy.
Yeah.
And throughout history, Christians throughout history associated Gog and Magog with the Huns, with the Mongols, with different forms of barbarians,
Right.
and Muslims did the same. If you look at Muslim texts in the time of the great Mongol invasions of the Muslim Empire, and the Mongols were so brutal, so strong, so unstoppable, they brought the Islamic Empire to their
To
knees.
its knees. Absolutely.
And there are texts which say that it looks like the Mongols are Gog and Magog. They're
Yeah.
coming. It's almost over. Judgment Day will come soon. So this
Yeah.
is this thing that they used throughout history.
Oh yeah, and even the Pope would say during the Mongol invasion, they would call like death is sweeping through the lands. Like this was it. The apocalypse is coming, and that the Mongols were like the instrument that's going to make it happen. And that was worldwide. That was widespread thought. But you mentioned something that I want to touch on that is really important, because the reason why I think this is in here in the Quran, and this is my own theory, I don't know how much I can prove this, but I think that the writer is trying to capture the minds of the eastern side of the Roman Empire by using these stories about the seven sleepers, about a story that even if he's not mentioning Alexander, it still strikes a nerve that they know this story. They're using themes that they would probably respond well to. So because I talk about this on my channel all the time, is that religion is probably the strongest form of propaganda, and it's deadly when it comes to war, because if you can get your enemy, if you can get the people, the main core population of your enemy, to align with you spiritually, emotionally, mentally, it makes it that much easier to go in and conquer those lands, because they're going to fight for you, not them.
Mhm.
So and this worked. We know this worked because Muhammad II, however you say his name, he's the one who goes and conquers Constantinople, and it seems like they swept through the eastern side of the Roman Empire over the course of many centuries, but they did it very successfully. I mean, they pretty much won all the Crusades. Jerusalem fell, Egypt fell. Egypt fell super fast. All the Arabic-speaking countries, I guess they became Arabic-speaking countries, but all the countries on the eastern side of the Roman Empire eventually fell to Islam, and I think this is part of the this had something to do with it. I really do.
Even the first conquest of Jerusalem was too easy.
Yeah.
It was just way too easy. That might have been also because of the constant. I mean, I think it is pretty much proven that the early conquests were very easy for the Muslim forces, because the Eastern Roman Empire had just been at war with the Persians for decades, for so long. They were weakened. The people were sick of war. They had enough of it.
Yeah.
The empires had enough of it, and Islam basically comes right at that moment,
Right time. Yep.
takes advantage of the situation and basically overruns everything, and
Yeah.
ironically appears like Gog and Magog.
Yeah, it's interesting. But then you got other stories like Adam and Satan, for example, which is in the Quran. This story as well would be familiar to people of the Eastern, especially in Egypt. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up Egypt is there's Nag Hammadi texts that were found in like the 19th, 20th century in Egypt. They're whether you want to call them Gnostic or Apocrypha texts, doesn't really matter. I don't really know. Those are all just vague terms anyway. But they're not canon biblical texts. Okay, what I'm getting at is the story of Adam and Satan was actually an older story, like we've been talking about this entire show, where what was his name, the writer? Justin the Gnostic, not Justin Martyr, but his name is Justin the Gnostic, and he was a writer. He was a Gnostic, actually. Well, obviously the name says Justin Gnostic, but he was writing a story about Adam being presented in front of these 24 archons, he calls them. Now that gets changed into angels later on by the Muslims, but the story was that he gets presented in front of these 24 archons, and Azazel says, "I will not bow to him," and then he gets cast out of heaven. That story sounds really eerily similar to in the Quran, where Adam gets presented in front of Iblis or Satan, and Satan says, "I'm not going to bow in front of him." So you kind of see, and then there's another, finally, this is the last one I'm going to mention, the baby Jesus, the infancy gospel. We already know this was a story being told in Egypt. That's part of the Nag Hammadi collection, was Jesus being is talking like a grown person as a baby, just like we see in the Quran. Where does he say to Mary? I can't remember what he says.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact words.
But either way,
he
doesn't matter.
talking as a baby.
He starts saying something about worship Allah or something like that.
He goes to the she goes to the people, and they are like what the hell is this? What did you do? Why do you have a baby? And then according to the Quranic narrative, and then she points at the baby, and then they're like, how are we supposed to speak to the baby? And then the baby starts speaking to them, and
right.
It's a very ridiculous story. And these accounts are found in the Infancy Gospel of James, I believe. And you know that those sources are by scholarly opinion thought to be they are dated to much later dates than the initial gospels that we have, I think, right? If that's not that's not, yeah, I think so. And they weren't included because they seem to heavily deviate from the narrative presented in the original gospels and the
they're heretical.
epistles.
Definitely heretical.
And they contain some very absurd things, which is why they are thought to be just later inventions based on hearsay and based on dramatizations of matters. And the Quran seems to borrow from those books. It borrows those accounts. It borrows the whole baby Jesus speaking as a baby. It borrows a story about turning a clay bird, into a living bird or something like that, I believe. Several other things.
And that's another story that I think is among those Nag Hammadi scriptures. Egyptian and Christian. The Coptic Church had a lot of weird, like, for example, even the Ethiopian Church preserved its own version of the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch has a story of Satan falling too. So that if you kind of put it all together, you can sort of paint a picture of how these ideas were getting spread into the Arabian Peninsula, and they just made it a different version of it and turned it into a monotheistic version, and they just ran with it. And then that's why I'm bringing this. The reason why I'm bringing this all up is because somebody in Arabia, whether it was Muhammad or Abu Bakr, I don't know, all of them together, they put their heads together and said, we can really take over the hearts and minds of people with a religion, and this will be the most. And it worked. It works. It absolutely works. And it's still working today in the world that we live in right now.
Well, there is actually a lot of there is good reason to believe that Muhammad, if he did indeed author the entirety of the Bible, I mean, of the Quran, sorry, if he did indeed reveal the Quran through revelations given to him by Allah through the angel Gabriel, as he claimed according to the sources, then we have good reason to believe that he did indeed try to appease and appeal to Christians and Jews, and he really looked up to them. He praised them as superior to his own stupid polytheistic people. Initially only, of course, well, first at the very beginning of the revelations, he doesn't talk very much about, the Quran doesn't talk very much about Christians and Jews. He doesn't try to talk to them. Gradually, it then turns toward trying to talk to the Christians and Jews and says things like, hey, let's come together and worship one God, and things like that. Over time, his relations with the Jews changed because the Jews seem to just ridicule him and say, hey, what is this? You're just a con man. And then he gets mad at the Jews, and the Quranic narrative changes drastically into vilifying Jews and hating them and saying that until the end of time the Jews will be the most hostile to you in the world and things like that. Muhammad tries to appease Christians. He can't get what he wants from them. Eventually it turns into vilifying Christians too, and basically saying, hey, if you keep saying that Jesus is God, then you will go to hell and burn there forever, and things like that. But throughout the Quran, there's so much that tries to initially make Christians and Jews like Muhammad and Islam. And we also know by the Islamic accounts that that Muhammad had relations with certain Christians. There were apparently Christians in Mecca where he was born. There were he apparently met Christians a lot on his travels as a merchant. And according to the narrative, when he starts receiving revelations, he goes to his wife, and his wife has a cousin who is a Nestorian Christian, who has converted to Christianity, who has become a Nestorian, and who writes down the Bible or the Gospels in some language, I don't know. And he basically talks to Muhammad and tries to inform him, tries to tell Muhammad that he is a prophet, which is strange by Nestorian standards, but still, that's apparently how the story goes. So, and another thing is, we have certain early Christian accounts. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who wrote this book, but it's basically directed at heresies. And he says in the book that the southeast, the Arabian lands, are basically full of heretical Christians, Christians who sought refuge in those lands because their beliefs were, shunned and demonized in the regular Christian environment. So it's very likely that Muhammad got a lot of weird Christian stuff that is, very distant from mainstream Christianity in his environment.
That brings me to this next issue is because we're talking about a place where this Quraysh tribe is supposedly there's a bunch of Jews living there, a bunch of Christians, but also a bunch of pagans as well. And there's a scholar, I can't remember his name right now. I'm probably just gonna I don't even know. I'm probably not gonna think of it. But he made a documentary. There's a full-blown documentary about how the Valley of Becca isn't Mecca. It's actually Petros. That it was where the city of Petros, which is where those buildings are carved into the rock, that was literally
Petra,
referred to as the Valley of Becca, and he thinks that the Kaaba is in the wrong place.
He has this. I think that's the work of Dan Gibson, and Jay Smith very much refers to that a lot. He keeps arguing for the narrative that Mecca is not actually the Mecca that exists today, but that it was actually in Petra, which was then part of the Eastern Roman Empire, and that as a result of a series of events such as a major earthquake and certain conflicts, the ruling Muslims then revised their whole scripture and moved the Kaaba, or rebuilt the Kaaba down in Arabia, in Mecca, and acted like this is how it has been from the very beginning. So that is a narrative. Yeah,
it actually makes sense from a standpoint of why they would do that. Is if climate change affected this area where they start losing water and their water source dries up, we gotta get out of here. We can't live here anymore. So that could be very plausible, especially when you put together that during the Augustan regime, and this is in the Historia. This is in some of the historians. I can't remember which one. Suetonius, Tacitus. There's a bunch of historians that write about Augustus. I can't remember which one. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to know exactly what I'm talking about here. I'm not making this up. Where they say that Augustus had a satrap in Arabia of was it Bedouins or Sabians, or one of those tribes that were basically they're pro Augustus. They were there, and he set them up there, and they had their backing basically, and that was like a huge deal for him to have a group of people that he can actually go to. And then I think they didn't leave. They became anti-Roman in the time of the next emperor, which is, I think it's either Tiberius or Caligula. But regardless of that, they were pro-Roman Arabs living in Petra, who probably had a civilization that had funding, had trade routes, which would make sense why that would be a populous area, which it isn't today, but back then it would have been.
I think it's barely habitable nowadays.
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that if it used to be habitable and now it isn't, it makes sense why that area would get changed. But you know, regardless of wherever the Kaaba is or not, the fact is this: if you're willing to say a valley is the same place because it says the word valley in it, then how are you not able to accept that the horned one with two mountains, who prayed to the sole God, who put up a barrier in Gog and Magog, all those connections don't fit, but the word valley fits because it says the word valley?
Yeah, there's one clarification that needs to be made about the whole valley issue, which is so the Quran only refers to Mecca as the mother of cities, as Mecca, and according to a certain Quran verse, as Becca. And the Muslim account is that, or the Muslim idea is that Becca is an old name for Mecca, an ancient name for Mecca, but people are not actually sure about that. We don't have any reports that confirm this. We don't have any historicity of Mecca at all. And the Bible mentions a place called the Valley of Becca, and Muslims try to make the connection and say, hey, look, this is actually Mecca. But that's a very terrible narrative, because the Valley of Becca is only mentioned once in the Bible as a place that has no further significance, that is merely mentioned as a valley, might be even metaphorical, that people walk through and then make it a place of joy. It's a dry place before they appear before God in Zion, which is clearly Jerusalem. And it wouldn't make sense to go down to Mecca and on your way to the pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
Yeah, Mount Sinai is in the desert that's between Egypt and Israel. It's not down more. It's not in the southern coast area.
Yeah.
So that's
pretty... Yeah. One thing that I want to quickly mention, I think I wanted to really get into that, about Gog and Magog. So there are speculations about what Gog and Magog refers to and what it is according to the Islamic narrative. In Islam, it is known as Yajuj and Majuj. We have the Quran, which briefly mentions them, which references them, and basically, tries to create this horror story about them. But we also have the Hadith, which are narrations about Muhammad and about the things that he said. And in those narrations, we have several Hadiths in which he talks about Gog and Magog as a major sign of the day of judgment, the last hour. And he says in those Hadith that Gog and Magog are restrained behind a wall at the moment, but today Allah has made a big wall in their has made a big hole in their wall, and they are trying to dig through it, and soon they will they will get through the wall.
Boogeyman's coming.
Yeah, soon they will get through the wall and destroy us all. And then people ask, "What? But there are righteous people among us. Will they destroy us despite that?" And he says, "Well, evil will increase among you, and then they will come." So perfect thing to say to people so that they don't disobey you.
Right. It always has to point to that. It always has to have that fear factor.
Yeah, but he basically explains that this is happening. This is going to happen at the end of time, and it is about to happen. He says in one hadith very specifically, he's apparently full of fear at the moment, and he says, "May Allah protect us from the turmoil that is about to come. Today, Gog and Magog have made a big hole in their wall. And basically soon they will come out and invade the world." And
they're eating their way through it, like with their teeth.
Yeah, and it's so dumb. I mean, and he says, Gog and Magog will fight you with swords and arrows, and after they are defeated, people will use their arrows for 7 years as firewood. It's something that doesn't make any sense today.
So weird.
Yeah. Or they will pass a lake, and they will be thirsty, and they will pass a lake, and they will be so numerous, and they will be so thirsty that they will drink from this lake and will immediately dry out the lake because they are so numerous. And it's just so many dumb accounts. It's like it's an ancient story
that's what pops out at me when I read it. When I was reading the Quran, it so quickly got to the point where I was like, okay, I can't. This can't be real. And the reason why is the whole genie thing, the Jinn. What are these Jinn? Like, okay, let's grant that there was Jinn at the time of. Let's go with this for a second. There really is Jinn. Why aren't we seeing them anymore? Where do they go? Where do they go?
You just don't see.
You just can't see them. They're only there for people who are believers.
I'll tell you something. So jinns are, for all those who are not aware, jinns are invisible beings that are in the Quran addressed several times together with humans. The Quran several times
There's
mentions
Muslim jinn too.
the jinns and the humans. So they are a creation parallel to humans, and they exist among us. And they dwell in dark and filthy places. They eat, animal dung and bones and stuff like that. Or they are there when we pee somewhere outside. They go there and try to, rest there or drink there or something like that. It's very dumb. But this is
You
not
said it's very dumb.
this is not something that is fringe by any means. This is not something that people are like, whatever. No, this
They
is
believe it.
extremely common. It's like, go to 95% of Muslims will tell you that jinns are real and that you are basically deluded for not believing in it.
But where are they? How come
Well,
no one has reported? Why doesn't anyone have on a smartphone a jinn video yet? It's like UFOs.
You know what will happen? They will every Muslim. I'm obviously being hyperbolic, but by every Muslim, I mean the vast majority, maybe for a very few exceptions. Every Muslim will tell you that they know somebody who has seen jinns. This is a common thing known among Muslims. I heard the same things as well when I was a Muslim. Talked to many people who told me things like, that they saw jinns, or, their father or somebody they knew have seen jinns, and they tried to steal things, and they tried to sexually assault them or fell in love with them. These things are extremely common in the Muslim world. I'm not joking. This is serious.
But you have to go where the person I am. I'm always digging where the origins are. They go. This goes back to the pagan era world, and even in like later texts, like Sinbad the Sailor, he comes across these genies and jinn. Why did that get brought into the fold?
Well, the pre-Islamic Arab pagans actually believed in these beings called the jinns. I mean, they are people who some of them are Bedouins, some of them are settled Arabs. They live in a vast desert. When it's night, it just looks very mysterious and very strange out there. And they were thinking about how the desert at night is roamed by jinns. It's dangerous. Don't go out there. Or they were trying to explain things like, belongings disappearing, or kids being abducted by things like, okay, the jinns came and took our belongings away, or the jinns came and abducted the child. And funnily enough, there is actually a hadith in which Muhammad continues this narrative and says that after dawn, or at dawn at a specific time, jinns come outside and they roam the night. So at that time, keep your children and your belongings safe, because the jinns might come and snatch them. And we have cameras today, we have things like that today, and you obviously cannot ever see something strangely
Google
moving
Earth
somewhere by
now, where
itself.
the whole entire planet is under surveillance. I don't think there's a single jinn that's ever popped up once.
Yep. So the pre-Islamic Arab pagans believe that some of these things are just separate beings, and some of them are deities, like they're gods. I think there's even the Quran, I think, even says that they took those some of the jinns as gods. Or I think Muhammad says they took jinns as gods. I can't exactly remember where it was, but it basically presupposes that jinns do exist. They are real, but that the pre-Islamic polytheists only became extreme by taking them as gods mistakenly, and thereby establishing their polytheistic beliefs, which is strange. It's like
you're saying the pagans were right that they exist, but they're wrong about everything else.
Yeah, so how can you really blame them, when they see these mysterious beings and just think, okay, I think this must be a god,
That's really strange.
Yeah, and in one story, there is even an incident where Muhammad sends one of his loyal companions to destroy a certain temple of the pre-Islamic polytheists, and he goes there, and he says, I went there, but I couldn't find the god there, the god is in the presence of this idol that I was looking for to destroy. And then Muhammad says, go back again. I'm not exactly sure if this is based on a fully authentic report, or if this is a telling in a tradition, but it basically says, go again. And then he goes there and he finds this mysterious being, this woman, naked woman or something, and then he goes and just kills her. And then he goes back to Muhammad and he says, okay, that was the goddess that you were looking for.
Yeah, so it's funny, because the more you dig into all this, you can see that Islam is like pulling different parts of Judaism, Christianity, paganism, and they're trying to mold together their own national religion.
Yeah, it's a syncretic religion made up of different things. And the belief in such beings was not unique to the Arabs. I mean, you had such things in Europe among the Scandinavian Nordic people.
They have a jinn, some sort of jinn version over there too.
Yeah, they believed that they were scared of forests. They believed that at specific times of the year or at the night, the forests are full of these very scary magical beings, and that you should be very careful.
For them. I used to know it too, but yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. They're like basically like a tree with like a spirit of like the forest basically, but like it'll cause wolves to come and eat you or like whatever they want, werewolves or like, but like it was all one big evil spirit that don't go in the woods. It's actually funny because you look at it like from a psychology standpoint or a Gnostic standpoint, whichever way you want to look at it. It's just the fear of humans of the unknown. And they're just they're turning it into a story. They're anthropomorphizing it. It's a very natural thing to happen. But to take those and try to make that affect the way we live our lives is just completely problematic.
It's very funny. I grew up in Germany, and at a very early grade, when I was a very young child in school, we learned about there was a big forest in Germany in the southwest known as the Black Forest, in German Schwarzwald.
That's where my grandfather's from.
Really?
Black Forest, Germany. I'm not joking. Well, no, my grandfather told me that either his father, either way, my family's from the Black Forest, Germany. That's what he used to tell me.
That's funny. That's funny. That's interesting.
It is interesting. I'll never forget that. Before he died, he told me that. He said, "You know where you're from. You're from the Black Forest, Germany." Anyways, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's totally fine. That's interesting. So I remember hearing certain stories about the Black Forest, and these are just retellings of old mythical fables and beliefs that Germans nowadays, of course, don't believe in. They're but they just tell these things for entertainment or for their mystical aspects and all that. But the Germanic people had certain beliefs about this Black Forest and about big, large, dark forests, and they would think that forests are inhabited by by dwarves and by all these strange beings that dwell in the forest, by some very scary beings and all that. And I remember even watching a movie that basically put these mythical elements together, and it was kind of a fantasy movie about this Black Forest. And I viewed that, and I viewed a movie of Germans kind of making entertainment of ancient German beliefs about what is out there in the unknown. But it never occurred to me to, to also look at my Islamic beliefs and to think,
Isn't that funny how that works?
And maybe it's just the same thing.
And you talk to Christians they laugh at Islam, like, oh my God, they believe in jinn, But it's like, oh yeah, the angel Michael's real though. It's like, and it happens with every religion from their standpoint. They have the truth, but everyone else is laughable, and they use the same logic we're using right now. Criticize other religions, and they're very smart about it. Some of them even better than we are, but their own can't be true. It has to be real. Really fascinating thing how that works.
It is very interesting. So I know we talked about a lot of things. I could talk forever. I love these topics.
We could close out, but before we do that, I just want to read some interesting facts. I'm going to say facts that are in the Quran about the sun and the moon.
Oh boy!
And then this will be quick. This will be like a minute or two, and then we'll just laugh our way off and say goodbye.
Okay.
Here we go. It says right here in 2:58, have you not considered the one who argued with Abraham about his Lord because Allah had given him kingship? Indeed, Allah brings up the sun from the east, brings it from the west. So I guess the sun is revolving around the earth in that sentence. What do they say? What's the argument against that? Oh, they're just being metaphorical, man. Okay, if you're revealing the truth of the universe, you should tell us that Allah spins the earth. At least say Allah spins the earth. And then here's another one.
One of my favorite biblical texts is I really like Ecclesiastes. I feel I think it's beautiful how philosophy. It reads. I just the end, the conclusion, like therefore worship God and all that. It's just okay, bad conclusion. but but the text has this telling of it says at the very beginning that
Vanity.
nothing changes, vanity, the world
Nothing new
stays the
under the
same,
sun.
and the sun rises and goes to its place, and then it comes back in the morning again, and then this happens again and again. And this book is written by by a guy, by a human. It doesn't have the same implication. You could say, okay, the biblical texts are thought to be inspired by God to these people, which is why they wrote them. So God intended things to be written that way. But with the Quran, you go many steps further, and you say these texts are not written by people. They are directly spoken by Allah Himself, word for word,
Right.
and then just revealed to Muhammad and put down by scribes. So you would expect accuracy more
Perfect
than
accuracy.
anything else in this Quran,
Now,
in this book.
Now, the funny thing about that is, at the time when this was written, they thought that the sun was in orbit of the Earth, like the moon.
Yeah.
So if a God was revealing something to a person, and he said to them, "Hey, I'm the one that spins the Earth and puts it around," that would be fascinating. That would actually make somebody say, "Whoa, this might be real," but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's like, I'm just trying to put that out there. It's like, if this is really as a revelation, it's supposed to change my mind and make me worship something, shouldn't it have some really fascinating things that nobody can prove how it got there?
Yeah.
It doesn't do that.
Why doesn't the Quran tell us about space, about the galaxies, about the universe, about planets and this and that? It just tells us these
Well,
old weird things that make us doubt the Quran.
And then meanwhile, philosophers from 500 BC, like Epicurus and Democritus, were talking about atomic theory back then, and then that gets pushed to the side. We got to have the church take over philosophy from the next 1,000 years. So then we got here's another one. It is He who made the sun a shining light, and the moon derived light and determined for its phases, that you may know the number of years and accounts. Wait, so did they just say the moon gives off its own light?
Yeah, the issue is you're reading a translation that was actually altered maliciously, deceptively, and says reflective light. The text doesn't say that.
Oh, really?
The text directly says that the moon is a light. The sun is basically a torch, a shining light, and the moon is a light. That's what it says. The moon is not a light.
The moon's not a light. Yeah. Here's another one. He causes the night to enter the day, and he causes the day to enter the night. And he has subjected the sun and the moon, each running its orbit for a specified term. That is Allah, your Lord. Him belongs sovereignty, and to those who invoke other to him and do not possess the membrane of a date seed. Huh?
Okay. There is another
so the sun has an orbit, guys. You guys better believe that, or you're going to burn in hell. Oh, here we go. And the moon therein reflected light that made the sun a burning lamp. What?
Wait.
When the sun is wrapped up in darkness, 81:1. What does that mean? What is the apologist's answer to that one? I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, Allah will apparently wrap up the sun on the day of judgment, but how do you wrap up this giant ball that you're spinning around? How does he wrap it up? Or the moon will lose its light or something like that, which is very ironic. The moon loses its light all the time. That's just how the moon works. So in Quran chapter 91, verse 1 to 4, it says, by the sun and its brightness, and by the moon as it follows it, the sun, and by the day as it displays it, the day displays the sun, and by the night as it covers it. So the night covers the sun.
It's like the that's like the old Christian terminology for what's that thing they call it that holds the sky up? The firmament.
Firmament, yeah.
It holds up the waters so that we don't have floods.
Well, the Quran also says that Allah holds up the sky so it doesn't fall down on us, and He holds it up with pillars that we cannot see, and things like that. It is ridiculous.
I wonder if they actually thought that blue sky was actually waters running past them. They actually thought that. Yeah. That's crazy.
Well, the Quran also says that Allah sends water through the sky, and that is rain.
Yeah, and He just leaks it a little bit so that we can get rain.
Yeah. We have some rain.
He's such a good builder.
One thing that I love to talk about, and this is the last thing that I just want to mention in regards to the sun and science, is that the Quran also says that the sun runs towards a stopping point, or as it is translated literally, toward its resting place. And there is further a tradition, a narration from Muhammad, where he talks about this. He sits together with one of his followers, and he says to his follower, "Do you know where the sun goes at sunset?" And he says, "Allah and his apostle know better." And you usually know when somebody says Allah and his apostle know better, he will usually say something totally stupid. Yeah.
Right. It's always like, we don't know this, but Allah knows. Only Allah knows.
And then he goes on and says, well, the sun runs toward its stopping point, or its resting place, under the throne of Allah, and there it prostrates to the throne of Allah, and then it asks for permission to rise again. So Allah gives it permission to rise, and then it comes back and rises again from its rising place and goes to its resting place.
Wait
But one day,
that's a flat earth theory right there.
Yeah, yes. But one day it will go to its resting place. It will be prostrating under the throne of Allah. It will ask for permission to rise again, but Allah will not give the sun the permission to rise, and will say to the sun, "Go back where you came from." So the sun will then rise from the west, and that will be the first sign of the last hour, of the coming of the day of judgment, and no repentance will be accepted after that day.
I didn't even know that. That's in the Quran?
That is in the hadith, but
still, hadiths are pretty serious.
Yeah, and this is
very few Quran only.
This is by Islamic standards definitely authentic, by Islamic standards, I say. And this is also, if you ask Muslims about the signs of the Day of Judgment, which is a very popular narrative, Islam relies heavily on eschatology. They will cite the sun rising from the west as the biggest or first sign of the Day of Judgment. This is what they believe is built on. I mean,
so in a world where the earth is round, that would mean that somebody in one side of the world would literally see the sun. I mean, okay. First of all, we have to pretend that the sun revolves around the earth. So this doesn't make sense at all. But yeah. Let's say it does. Let's say the sun does revolve around. Wait a minute. So that means people today still think the sun revolves around the earth?
Well, they would reinterpret this today as saying, well, it will just, the sun will, the earth
would stop spinning and turn the other way.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense. This is so weird.
Why would that happen?
And then because my one friend, he's a flat earther and he's a Muslim. He's a flat earther because he's a Muslim, which shows you how problematic Islam is. But I knew someone like that too.
He
would interpret this. He's a good guy. I love the guy, but this is where his head's at. God bless him, pun intended. But he would think that the sun is going underneath the flat earth and just waiting there. Like that's what to him, that text would make perfect sense. The sun is going to go underneath the flat earth. We're all going to be in darkness. And that's like that. That's where their head, that's where the mentality is.
I mean, I understand how some people may believe that the earth is flat and that the sun is up there the entire time, like, moving above us. But how the hell can you in today's time, believe that the sun actually goes under the earth someplace? I mean, that would be
just crazy.
That's ridiculous.
I don't know if that's not enough for you right there to think about some stuff. I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah. But there's so much more that we can add to this. But
there really is. This could be a 10-hour conversation if we really wanted. If we really wanted to go to like exhaust all these examples out. Like I had a list that I was going through when I was reading those. That was just like there was like 90 of them. Like I just picked out the ones that I saw right away.
Well, I made a huge video, which is the video that I worked the longest on, which is called The Scientific Mistakes of the Quran, in which I listed 60 scientific mistakes in the Quran. So, and it is full. I mean, it's 60 mistakes, but some of
I'm going to leave a link to that one in the description for people who want to check out more.
And then some of the mistakes have several different Quran verses listed. So if you want to bring it down to how many mistakes there are in the Quran, there are a lot,
And you know what? And we'll close on this. And that's the problem, is that the only way for this to actually be a true book is that you have to descend into conspiracy theories that NASA's lying to us. The earth is really flat. Everything's all just a conspiracy to make this book not be real. That's the only way to make it work. And then you have to go down the road of predetermination too. Which is even more problematic.
Or you have to sit down and diligently reinterpret everything that this book says and strictly arguing that your reinterpretation is actually true and that all those who read the book as it is are basically deceptive liars. And that is something that is unfortunately very commonly done today.
Yeah. Hey, man, thanks for coming on. We'll definitely do this again, and it's very soon, you know, a couple weeks, maybe a month or two, but it's been great. And everybody go, if you're not subscribed to him already, go and subscribe.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It was a fantastic conversation. I would love to come back and do this again.
Definitely.
And stay away from Islam.